Tonight, for our interview series, we have Jeff Pogue, who's a pediatric anesthesiologist. You bring just a very unique perspective to leadership, and we'd like to kind of dig deeper and kind of learn more about your path and also some insights in terms of, what people that are interested in legislative affairs, what they would like to do or what they can do as they embark on their own careers out of training. So, if you wouldn't mind, Jeff, give us a little bit of some background in terms of training and then how you got into your current position right now.
Sure. Well, initially I started out as a resident in pediatrics, and that ultimately led me to, I was at Harbor UCLA Medical Center, was chief resident there, and then did a year in pediatric critical care. One of the things you have to talk about are great mentors. And I had a great mentor in Judith Brill, a professor of anesthesiology at UCLA, who I met while I was working in the pediatric intensive care unit at Harbor UCLA and occasionally going up to the main campus at UCLA. And she told me in no uncertain terms, Jeff, if you want to be a good critical care physician, you have to go through anesthesia training. And that was my introduction to the value added being a physician anesthesiologist. So I think that helped me get into Mass General and then ultimately Boston Children's and pediatric anesthesia. And then I worked for a while at New England Deaconess Hospital, and my mentor there was Dr. Ellison G. Pierce, who was an amazing person to know, and he was involved with all of the fellows in training, and he offered me a chance to be a fellow in cardiac anesthesia. It was a kind of a mini fellowship following my pediatric anesthesia training. Dr. Pierce is known for founding the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. And it was the year, it was literally the year before I was there in his program that he began laying the groundwork for the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. So to see that develop from the ground up, and I'm still a member of the foundation and all the great things they've done for patient care over the last few decades has just been extraordinary.
Yeah, I think you really hit on it. And I think this is a common theme that's come up with talking to other folks that we want to have a conversation with that are in leadership. And that's the idea of a mentor. Now you've taken an uncommon path going from training, obviously, into clinical practice, but then you've gotten pretty involved with legislative affairs and government policy at not only the federal but also the state levels. And as the acting CSA president, I mean, obviously you're just knee deep in all of this, and that's very important. But I mean, can you shed some light in terms of how mentors have kind of guided you along that particular pathway, and what is the importance of being aware of legislative policy for a graduating anesthesiologist that may not know of the world outside of the operating room?
I've always had an interest in uh, politics and what happens at the local, state, and regional level, going way back to medical school. Mentors I worked with in medical school got me involved with the American Academy of Family Physicians, and I was privileged to actually serve as president of the student section of the American Academy of Family Physicians back in the early 80s. And I did it back then just to learn more. It was more fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun for me and travel. And I didn't have a lot of money back then, and it was an opportunity to get back to go to meetings and meet people that are out there in practice. And after I left Boston and came out here, I went through a period where I just got into my job and I worked a lot. And the key here is for people coming out of training, I think there's no best time to really get plugged in into advocacy. You can do it when you're young, You don't want to get burned out. You can get involved later in your career. I took a little hiatus for a few years, and then in my early 40s got re-engaged. And again, it was a local anesthesiologist, Helen O'Keefe from Kaiser here in Walnut Creek, who I'd gotten to know. And I used to try and network a little bit with other physicians and go to dinners in the area. And that's why those networking dinners are so important, whether it's through the CSA or the ACCMA, to get out there. I just encourage people to get out there and meet other docs, even if they're not in your own specialty, and see what's going on out there. First few years I got involved with the CSA, I often just sat in the room and absorbed everything, took everything in. Uh, and after a while, it's kind of like simulation. After you keep doing the sim, it becomes less intimidating and more enjoyable and more personable. And just like sim, you look forward to it and you get a lot out of it.
What is it about legislative affairs? What is it that makes it vital for us to be aware of? And, you know, what can you tell people that maybe not are interested, not, I mean, rephrase it, maybe that aren't necessarily going to follow in the path of, going into politics or being interested in influencing legislative policy, but what do you tell those folks that, in terms of the importance of awareness of policy?
Oh, it's critically important. I mean, you look at the history of Medicare, which was uh, brought about under the Johnson administration and then implemented in 1972 under the Nixon administration. Medicare used to pay usual and customary rates, and Medi-Cal or Medicaid, we depend on state and federal funds for Medicaid, is a remnant of, was born out of Social Security, and it used to pay very, very well. And I think what I've noticed, because obviously if you're a hardworking doctor, you care about what you take home, your reimbursement. You want to secure for your retirement. And I'm sure it bothers folks, as it did me, that just little things like why is it in Arizona that their Medicaid pays better than Medicare? And in our state, Medi-Cal pays much worse than Medicare. And as you know, with Medicare, we have the 27% problem,
Mhm.
meaning that our average contractor rates, I think for most groups, uh, uh, are much higher than Medicare and substantially higher than Medi-Cal. So if if this frustrates you as a physician, you can either kind of sit on the sideline and complain about it, or you can read more about it. You can get involved with your society, albeit through the California Society of Anesthesiologists and the ASA, or through the CMA and its component societies, or through your medical staff at your own hospital and networking with your own colleagues and others. There's many ways to gain more insight into many of these important issues.
Is there a requisite degree that I have to have? Is there a certain level of training that I need to have to actually pursue this course? And I mean, it sounds to me that you just have to really have an interest, and you have to run into the right people, and just, you know, work to learn like the craft, and to be able to engage.
Absolutely. And as we're doing this interview during the pandemic, right at the start of the vaccination, it's been a tough year for networking and getting people together and that camaraderie you spoke of, which I think is so important. Zoom can only achieve that so much. I mean, there's a lot of good things about Zoom, the fact that more people can attend meetings. And even some of our meetings with legislators this last year, we've had more people on the Zoom calls, so therefore more engagement. But I think it's nice when you're just getting involved, that personal touch. And I would encourage anybody wanting to get involved to look for our CSA meetings that we have, both our annual meeting, which will be in San Diego the next few years when we can meet again in person.
There's something called the Coldan Committee within the CSA. Can you shed some light on in terms of what that is and how that committee is designed to help people that are looking to get into leadership?
COLDAN stands for Committee on Leadership Development and Nominations. And I actually went through that committee, I think the first or second year it was around. And the committee consists of some of our best mentors who've been around for a while within the society, California Society of Anesthesiologists, often people involved at high levels within the ASA as well. And it's chaired by the outgoing the immediate past president of our society. So this year, Chris Doyle is chairing that committee. They will often they will people can get to Coldan two ways. The people within Coldan with suggestions from others outside Coldan will actually reach out to people they think would be a great fit for a certain position. Once you get involved with CSA, you will often reach out to you and say, gosh, we'd love you to come talk to us. We think you'd be a great fit for this particular committee. And that's often how people get started. We also encourage everybody, and we send out emails every year to just, if we're missing somebody and there's somebody out there that wants to kind of start going up the ladder a little bit, getting involved with the committee, maybe a bigger role in that committee ultimately, then to make an appointment. And the Coldan committee is happy to talk to you and let you know what you need to do.
Certainly, people are very important in terms of guiding one along a certain career path. But can you summarize some of the highlights of your career?
Sure, I can give you one example about how advocacy can affect what you do on your job and personalize the advocacy experience. As you know, some years ago, we became aware that, and as did people around this country, became aware of pediatric deaths and bad outcomes that were occurring in dental offices. Over the last decade, we lost about 10 children. I got a call with the Dental Board of California asking how CSA could help with their standards for monitoring and whatnot. And that person's name was Dr. Bruce Witcher, who's now president of the Dental Board of California, an amazing guy, an oral maxillofacial surgeon. So CSA became involved with helping put guidelines down there. One big one was end-tidal CO2 monitoring, which became a standard for ASA, but was not a standard, and actually still is not a standard in the dental world. But we've put it out there, and I think it's been adopted in many practices. Going back about 4 years ago, I decided I couldn't really talk as a subject matter expert on this unless if I kind of had an idea of what it was like doing dental anesthesia. So I applied and received my certificate, my license for general dental anesthesia. And I hooked up with a couple of guys in our group. They created a BAMA, Bay Area Mobile Anesthesia. And now I spend about 8 to 10 days a month going to dental offices. And I had to buy my own anesthesia machine. I carry my own defibrillator and mobile code card, my own dantrolene because I carry succinylcholine. We bring the operating room to the dental office, and I'm in my fourth year now. But the first year, frankly, I was terrified, and I learned how I could see how easy it would be for a dentist doing moderate sedation to slip into general anesthesia, because it's really a continuum from minimal, moderate, deep sedation, and then going to general anesthesia. So now I have a good understanding, and when I talk, I've had the privilege of testifying in Sacramento on this topic several times, and I feel I can bring a certain expertise to that. So that's kind of an example of real life advocacy that you can bring your passion to, get involved. Uh, it brings me a great deal of joy, and doing dental anesthesia, it's very different than doing it in a hospital or even a surgery center. So I would urge other people interested to reach out, give me a call, and uh, if you have any interest.
One of the coolest things about, this interview process is that you ask a question, and in your mind you kind of spin kind of what you expect as an answer. And I love how sometimes what happens is you get an answer that is constructed completely different than what you expect, but is equally awesome, right? And so, it's good to hear that story that you told. And if I could summarize it, I mean, what you're really saying is just that you have to dive in. And part of diving in is diving in and accepting what is the unknown, and you got to give it all your all. And ideally it's something you're passionate about, and you have to have a little bit of faith in those that you work with. And there has to be some hope, and that there's a good path for you, and you'll land safely, and that there will be people to catch you and to guide you along the way.